What happens when one joke about a baby's resemblance turns into a legal nightmare? How far can a man go to protect himself after realizing his wife's innocent laugh might hide betrayal? I'm Mirela Vance, 33, and people always say I have a big personality. They mean I talk too much, laugh too loud, and never let anyone else have the last word. My husband, Evan, used to love that about me. He'd tell our friends that I could make a funeral feel like a birthday party. Maybe that's why what happened at that restaurant didn't feel like a big deal to me. It was supposed to be funny, a little joke to lighten the mood. I didn't realize one sentence could burn an entire life down. We'd gone out for dinner to celebrate Martin Cole's promotion. My manager, my mentor, the one I kept insisting was like family. Evan came even though office things weren't really his scene. He's a quiet type, a teacher, polite to everyone, but never the center of attention. I liked that balance between us, or I used to. That night, I was in full performance mode, telling stories, keeping everyone laughing. When Martin said something about Noah's curly hair, I laughed and said, "He gets that from you, Martin. Everyone says my boy looks just like my manager." It got a few chuckles. I thought it was harmless. But when I glanced at Evan, he wasn't laughing. His jaw tightened, and he just stared at his plate. I brushed it off. On the way home, he barely spoke. I filled the silence by saying he shouldn't take jokes so seriously. He said quietly that there are some jokes you don't make about your own child. I told him he was being dramatic, that people always compare kids to whoever's around. He asked if there was any truth to it. I laughed again, but it came out wrong, too sharp. That was the first night he slept on the couch. At the time, I thought he was overreacting. Now I know it was the sound of a man deciding he no longer knew who he'd married. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The night of the dinner is burned into my memory, not because of the food or the people, but because of the silence that followed afterward. It was one of those sleek places downtown where everything looks expensive but tastes bland. I'd been excited about it all week because Martin Cole, my manager, was celebrating his promotion, and honestly, it felt like my win too. I'd worked beside him for 3 years, long nights fixing reports, proofreading his presentations, saving him from his own sloppy emails. Everyone at the office joked that I was his right hand. I liked that title. It sounded important. Evan didn't want to go. He said it was a work thing and that I'd have more fun without him. But I insisted. I wanted him to see the people I spent most of my days with, to see how respected I was. I guess a small part of me also wanted to show Martin that I had a husband worth admiring, a solid, steady man who made me look grounded. So, we went. Evan wore that navy shirt I bought him last Christmas, the one that brings out the color of his eyes. I thought he looked handsome, but the moment we walked in, he seemed out of place. The laughter, the drinks, the polished office talk, it wasn't his world. Martin greeted us like we were old friends, shaking Evan's hand, patting his shoulder, saying how lucky he was to have a wife like me. I could see Evan's polite smile tighten a little at that, but I ignored it. We sat at a long table with coworkers and their partners. The drinks kept coming, and I was in my element, telling stories, making jokes, keeping everyone entertained. Evan mostly listened. That's what he does. He listens and observes, never interrupts. It used to make me feel safe, like no matter what I said, he'd quietly keep me in check. But that night, his calmness irritated me. I wanted him to join in, to be part of my world for once. The turning point came when someone asked about Noah, our 2-year-old. Martin had seen a photo of him on my desk earlier that week, so he teased, saying, "He's going to be a heartbreaker just like his mom." I laughed too loud and said, "Please, that kid looks more like you than Evan." The whole table laughed. It was one of those jokes that lands before you can think twice. I even followed it with, "Guess I spend too much time at the office, huh?" Another round of laughter. Martin grinned, but I saw the change in Evan's face, the way he blinked once, slow and deliberate, before taking a sip of water. The laughter died down quickly after that. He didn't say anything, not a single word, but I could feel the heat coming off him. His silence filled the room more than any argument could have. I tried to smooth it over by changing the subject, talking about vacation plans, how work was hectic, how Martin was such a great boss. But Evan didn't join in. Even when people asked him questions, he gave short, polite answers. It felt like everyone was watching him, waiting to see if he'd break. When dessert came, I leaned close and whispered that he was being weird, that he was making things awkward. He didn't look at me. He just said very quietly, "Do you think that's funny?" I rolled my eyes, told him to stop taking everything so seriously. But he pushed his chair back and said he was going to get some air. I laughed to the table, pretending everything was fine, but my hands were shaking. On the drive home, he didn't turn on the radio. He just stared straight ahead. I started rambling, saying how Martin was like family, how everyone jokes like that. I even joked again that if Noah had Martin's paycheck, maybe I'd be okay with it. He didn't even blink. Finally, he said, "If you ever said that because there's truth to it, I need to know now." His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through me. I told him he was paranoid, that I'd never do anything like that. He nodded once and said, "Then you won't mind proving it." At first, I thought he meant proving it with words, with reassurance. But the way he said it made my stomach twist. He wasn't angry, not the way people usually are. He was calculating, quiet, too calm. When we got home, he went straight upstairs. I stayed downstairs, scrolling through my phone, pretending not to care. But every little sound made me jump. The creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the door clicking shut when he went to the guest room. The next morning, he was already dressed for work when I woke up. He handed me Noah's breakfast bottle without a word. When I asked if he was still mad, he just said, "You'll see how serious I am soon enough." Then he left. That should have scared me, but instead, I told myself he was bluffing, that he'd get over it. I called my sister later and told her Evan was overreacting to a dumb joke. She didn't laugh. She said maybe it wasn't the joke. Maybe it was how comfortable I sounded saying it. I hung up on her. I didn't want to hear it. That night, Evan didn't come home until late. He didn't touch his dinner. He just sat on the couch scrolling through his phone. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Looking into a few things." I told him I didn't like his tone, and he said, "You'll like the truth even less." I didn't know it then, but he'd already started talking to someone, a lawyer, a quiet man who would later hand me an envelope that would tear my world in half. But back then, I still believed I was in control. I thought I could fix it with a smile, a half-hearted apology, maybe a few days of good behavior. I had no idea that the next time Evan spoke about Noah, he'd be asking for proof that our son was even his. The days after that dinner stretched like gum, thin, sticky, impossible to clean off. Evan wasn't yelling, which somehow made it worse. He wasn't distant either, not in the usual sense. He was there, present in every room, but quiet in that way that makes your stomach knot because you know he's thinking, observing, adding things up. I told myself he was being ridiculous, that men get dramatic when their pride is bruised. Still, every time he looked at Noah, I caught him studying the child's face, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. At first, I tried to make things normal. I cooked his favorite pasta, lit candles, even wore that stupid sweater he liked, the one that made me look like a mom from a cereal commercial. He thanked me, sat down, ate in silence. I kept trying to start small talk, asking about his classes, his students, anything. He said everything was fine, but I could tell it wasn't. When I mentioned Martin, just in passing, his fork stopped mid-air. He didn't say a word, just resumed chewing. That's when I realized silence could bruise harder than shouting. Work became my escape. Martin didn't mention the dinner, thank God. If he noticed the tension between me and Evan that night, he was too smart to bring it up. But there was this new energy between us. He started stopping by my desk more often, always with some quick question that turned into 10 minutes of banter. I told myself I needed that attention. After all, it's not like Evan was giving me any. A few colleagues noticed, I'm sure. I could feel the looks when Martin leaned on the edge of my desk, close enough that I could smell his cologne. I convinced myself it was harmless. That Thursday, I stayed late finishing a report, and Martin offered to drive me home since it was raining. I hesitated but said yes. Evan hated when Martin drove me anywhere, but I told myself he wouldn't find out. When we pulled up to the house, the porch light was still on. Through the window, I saw Evan sitting on the couch, holding Noah, the TV on but muted. For a second, I felt guilty, like a kid caught sneaking in after curfew. Martin leaned over and said, "You don't owe anyone an explanation for staying late." I smiled weakly and got out. Evan didn't even look up when I came in. He just said, "You smell like cologne," and went upstairs. The next morning, his mother called. Linda never calls unless something's wrong. She asked, too casually, if everything was all right between us. I told her yes, of course, and she said, "Evan's been spending a lot of time here lately. Says he needs quiet to think." That stung. Why would he need quiet? What was he thinking about? I told her not to worry, that we were fine. But I could hear the doubt in her silence before she said goodbye. That weekend, my sister Clara came over. She's the opposite of me. Soft-spoken, cautious, never says something she can't take back. She noticed the tension right away. "You two fighting?" she asked while helping me fold laundry. I shrugged, said it was nothing. She gave me that look, the one that says she already knows the truth, but wants to see if I'll admit it. Finally, she said, "You need to stop texting that man from work. Evan's not stupid." I snapped back that she didn't understand, that Evan was turning paranoid over a stupid joke. Clara didn't argue, just said quietly, "Then maybe stop giving him reasons to be." I wanted to throw the laundry basket at her. That night, I checked Evan's phone while he was in the shower. I knew his passcode. I'd always known it. I wasn't expecting to find much, maybe a few texts to his mom or a friend, but what I found made my chest tighten. A message thread with someone named Daniel, attorney at law. I clicked it open. The messages were short and cold. "I'll gather documentation. Yes, we can request private testing. No confrontation necessary." I locked the phone and set it back down like it was on fire. When he came out of the bathroom, I asked casually if he was working on a new project at school. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "You could call it that." Then he kissed Noah's forehead, grabbed his jacket, and left again. I stood there, frozen, staring at the door. At work the next day, I tried to distract myself. Martin came by my cubicle, asked if everything was okay. I told him Evan was being difficult. He chuckled and said, "Jealous men usually are." I wanted to believe he was right, that this was just Evan overreacting. But later, when I got home, there was an envelope on the table. Inside was a note in Evan's handwriting. "I took Friday off. We need to talk. No love, no Evan, just that." I called my mom that evening, hoping she'd take my side. She did what she always does, told me I was dramatic, told me to give Evan space, told me men don't like feeling embarrassed. "He'll calm down," she said. "You've always been too sharp for your own good." I wanted to believe her, but my gut said otherwise. Friday came, and he didn't go to work. He stayed home, quiet, composed, moving around the house with this deliberate calm that made me uneasy. He cleaned out the filing cabinet, sorted through receipts, even checked the mailbox 3 times. I asked what he was doing, and he said, putting things in order. That's when I lost it. I accused him of trying to punish me for being funny, of making me feel like a criminal for something innocent. He just looked at me and said, "You think it's punishment?" "No, Mirela. It's preparation." I didn't understand what that meant then, but I would soon enough. He wasn't preparing for a fight. He was preparing for the end. By Monday, the air in the house felt like walking through fog. Evan wasn't saying much, but every move he made was precise, almost rehearsed. He had started keeping a small notebook, scribbling in it at the kitchen table while sipping coffee. When I asked what he was doing, he said it was just notes for work. But teachers don't usually write down the exact dates their wives came home late or who they were texting during dinner. I caught a glimpse of one page once, my name, underlined twice. I told myself I was imagining things. I had to, otherwise I'd have to admit he didn't trust me, so I leaned harder into pretending everything was fine. I texted him at lunch, sent him pictures of Noah playing, added heart emojis like before. He'd reply hours later with a single word, "Nice." The distance wasn't just emotional anymore, it was strategic. He wasn't sulking, he was collecting. At work, I tried to shake it off. Martin was back from a business trip, tan, confident, easy. When I told him about Evan's coldness, he smirked and said I should let the man cool off. Then he added, almost carelessly, "You can't fix fragile male egos, Mirela. You just have to stop apologizing for being magnetic." The way he said magnetic made my stomach flip, the kind of flutter that makes you forget every sensible thought. I laughed, a little too loudly, and said, "Tell that to my husband." He smiled and said, "Maybe I just did." That afternoon, he asked me to stay late to help with a quarterly report. It was harmless, I told myself, even when our knees brushed under the desk. Nothing happened, but the tension was thick enough to feel wrong. When I finally left, it was past 8. I drove home rehearsing excuses. The system crashed. I lost track of time. Martin needed help. All of them sounded weak. Evan was sitting in the living room again, this time surrounded by stacks of papers, bank statements, insurance documents, tax forms. I froze in the doorway. He didn't even look up when I came in. I said something light like, "Wow, doing our taxes early?" He said, "Just reviewing what's mine." My throat went dry. I asked what that meant, and he said, "You'd be surprised how many things aren't shared the way you think they are." I laughed nervously, said he was being weird. He looked at me then, steady, almost kind, and said, "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." That night, I barely slept. My brain kept spinning. What was he planning? A confrontation? A separation? I thought about checking his email, but he'd changed his passwords. That was new. The next morning, he was gone before sunrise. I found a note on the counter. "Don't wait up. No explanation, no destination." I went through the day distracted, my stomach twisting every time my phone buzzed. Around 3 p.m., Martin stopped by my cubicle again, asking if I was okay. I told him Evan was acting paranoid. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Well, maybe you should lay low for a while, let him come back to you." The way he said it made it sound like I'd done something wrong. By the time I got home, the house felt hollow. Noah was at daycare, and the lights were off. On the dining table was a manila envelope with my name written in Evan's handwriting. I didn't open it at first. I poured myself a glass of wine, paced the kitchen, told myself it was probably a letter, maybe even an apology. But when I finally tore it open, the air left my lungs. Inside were 3 papers, one from a family law firm, one from our bank, and one labeled Petition for Paternity Verification. I read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. He'd filed for a DNA test, for Noah, our son. My hands shook so badly I had to sit down. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail. I texted him, "Are you insane? What are you doing?" No response. 10 minutes later, a message came through. just being sure. I drove straight to my mother's house, barely breathing the whole way. She was sitting on the couch, watching her soap operas, and I blurted it out before I could stop myself. "He's testing Noah. He actually thinks." She didn't even look surprised. She sighed, said, "You shouldn't have joked like that, Mirela." That made me want to scream. "You're taking his side?" I snapped. She said, "I'm saying he's a man. You embarrassed him in front of people who matter to him. This is how they get even, quietly." That night, I called Clara. She didn't answer, but she texted back. "He told me he's meeting with an attorney tomorrow. Maybe you should too." I barely remember the rest of that evening. I know I walked into Noah's room, sat on the floor beside his crib and stared at his face. I saw my own features there, the same nose, the same eyes. Of course he was Evans. How could he not be? But then my brain started betraying me, thinking about Martin's smile, his same wavy hair, the timing of everything. I shook my head hard, told myself to stop. The next day, I cornered Martin in his office. I told him Evan was getting legal people involved, that he'd filed for a test. Martin froze for a second, then leaned back in his chair and said, "That's not my problem." I said he couldn't just say that after everything. He replied, "After what, Mirela? We've had conversations, not confessions." His voice was cold now. "Don't drag me into your marriage. I have my own reputation to protect." I walked out of his office shaking. The one person I thought might defend me was already erasing me. When I got home that evening, Evan's clothes were still in the closet, but half his drawers were empty. On the kitchen table sat another envelope, this time sealed with the letterhead of Daniels and Rowan family law. I didn't open it right away. I already knew what was inside. He wasn't bluffing anymore. Whatever love or trust had existed between us had turned into evidence, signatures, and silence. The day after I found the envelope, everything changed. Evan stopped being my husband and became something else, someone official, unreachable. Every text, every word came filtered through lawyers. I tried calling him again that morning, but he didn't answer. Instead, his attorney emailed me, asking for my cooperation in facilitating a non-contentious DNA verification process. Those were the exact words. Non-contentious, like this was just a routine checkup and not the slow dismantling of my life. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the email until Noah started crying. I picked him up, whispering that everything was fine, even though my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped his bottle. Evan came by that afternoon, not to talk to me, but to pick up some of his things. He rang the bell like a stranger. I opened the door, expecting him to come in, but he stayed on the porch. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, jaw clenched, but calm. Too calm. I asked if we could talk privately, just us. He said there was nothing to discuss until results came back. Then he looked past me toward Noah and said, "Make sure he eats his vegetables." And just like that, he walked away. I called my mother as soon as the door shut. I was half crying, half furious. She said I needed to swallow my pride and apologize before things got worse. I told her I hadn't done anything wrong. She said, "You don't have to be wrong for someone to feel betrayed." That made me angrier. I hung up before she could lecture me. At work, I could feel the whispers start. Martin kept his distance, avoiding eye contact in meetings. I caught one of the accounting girls giving me a pitying look. I asked her what her problem was, and she just said quietly, "Everyone's heard about the test." My stomach dropped. I didn't even ask how. Maybe Evan had talked to someone, or maybe gossip just moves faster when it smells blood. Later that day, HR called me in. My boss, Martin's boss technically, sat there with a polite corporate smile and said they'd received an anonymous concern about my relationship with the supervisor. My ears rang. I said there was nothing inappropriate, that everything was professional. They said they'd still need to conduct a brief internal review, just to be thorough. I wanted to scream, but I nodded instead. I knew better than to explode in front of HR. That evening, I went to Evan's mother's house. I thought maybe I could reason with her, appeal to her sense of family. Linda opened the door, saw me, and didn't smile. She let me in, but only barely. Evan was sitting in the living room, papers spread across the coffee table. I tried to speak, but he held up his hand and said, "This isn't the place." I told him we couldn't do this to Noah. He said, "That's why I'm doing it." His mother didn't say a word, just watched me like a judge who'd already made up her mind. Finally, I snapped. I said this was cruel, that he was destroying our family to make a point. He stood up slowly and said, "A family built on lies isn't a family." Then he walked out. Linda followed him into the kitchen, and when she came back, she looked at me and said softly, "You should go home, Mirela." I did, but I drove around the block 3 times before I could make myself pull into the driveway. That night, I sat in Noah's room again, scrolling through pictures of us, his first steps, his birthday, Evan holding him with that proud, stupid smile. I told myself Evan was overreacting, that he'd see how ridiculous this all was once the test cleared everything up. I even started believing it a little. But then I got an email from HR requesting I attend a follow-up meeting regarding workplace conduct. My heart dropped. Someone had reported more, probably Martin trying to save his own skin. 2 days later, the test results arrived. Evan came by with his lawyer, both of them formal, detached. They asked if I wanted to open the envelope myself. My hands refused to move. Evan broke the seal, scanned the paper once, and exhaled through his nose. His lawyer said something about verifiable results and subsequent steps. Evan didn't look at me, just at the floor. I heard the words but couldn't process them. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. I don't remember much after that. I remember screaming that the test must be wrong, that labs make mistakes, that he'd poisoned the results somehow. Evan didn't respond. He just walked out with the lawyer, leaving the envelope on the counter. When I called my mother, she sounded tired. "What are you going to do now?" she asked. I said, "He's not really leaving, right? He's just angry." There was a long pause before she said, "He's already left, Mirela. You just didn't notice." The next week blurred together. Calls from HR, whispers at work, a letter from Evan's attorney outlining custody and financial terms. It was all business, all legal language, the kind of words that sound harmless until you realize they're stripping your life apart one clause at a time. I spent my nights rehearsing what I'd say if Evan came back, how I'd explain that it wasn't like that with Martin, that it was emotional confusion, not betrayal. But he never came. When I finally saw him again, it wasn't in our house or even the neighborhood. It was at the courthouse steps, him in a pressed shirt, his lawyer beside him, handing papers to mine. He didn't meet my eyes. I wanted to shout, to beg, to remind him of who we were before all this, but my voice wouldn't come. He just said, "This is the right thing to do," and walked inside. For the first time, I realized he wasn't trying to punish me. He was just done. And somehow, that was worse than anger. When the court date finally came, I dressed like I was going to a job interview. Navy skirt, white blouse, calm makeup, nothing flashy. I thought maybe if I looked composed enough, reasonable enough, the judge would see that this had all gone too far. Evan arrived 10 minutes early, of course. He always was the punctual one. He didn't even glance my way as he sat down beside his lawyer. I could smell the faint trace of his aftershave when he walked by. It used to make me feel safe. Now it made me want to scream. My lawyer leaned over and whispered that this wasn't about guilt or innocence anymore. Just logistics, property division, custody, support. He said words like amicable settlement and best interests of the child. I wanted to laugh at how clinical it all sounded. This was our life, not a spreadsheet. When the hearing started, Evan spoke only when asked. His voice was steady, formal. He told the judge he intended to fulfill his legal responsibilities, but that he could no longer maintain a parental role founded on deceit. Hearing him call our marriage deceit cut deeper than any insult could have. I tried to interject, but my lawyer gripped my wrist under the table, warning me with his eyes. The judge turned to me next, asking if I had any objections to the petition for financial separation and revised custody. I opened my mouth, and nothing came out. Finally, I managed, "He's still Noah's father." Evan's lawyer corrected me gently. "Biologically, no. And that is the basis for this proceeding." The judge nodded, scribbled notes, and asked if I wished to contest the paternity findings. My lawyer had already explained it was pointless. Once the results were verified by the lab, there was no appeal. Still, I said I needed time. The judge gave me a week. Evan didn't react. Outside the courtroom, I chased after him. "You can't just erase everything," I said. He turned, finally meeting my eyes for the first time in weeks. "I'm not erasing anything," he said. "I'm protecting what's left." I told him he was being cruel, that he was abandoning Noah over numbers on a piece of paper. He said quietly, "You did the abandoning, Mirela. I'm just filing the paperwork." Then he walked away. For the next few days, I tried every tactic I knew. I sent long texts, some begging, some furious. I told him Noah still called him Daddy, that blood didn't change that. No response. Then I sent a voice message, my voice shaking, saying that maybe I'd made mistakes, but he was breaking something sacred. He didn't even open it. At work, things got worse. HR completed their so-called review. They didn't fire me, but they reassigned me to a smaller department on a different floor to maintain professionalism. Translation: keep me away from Martin. I confronted him afterward, told him he should have spoken up for me. He said, "I don't get involved in domestic disputes, Mirela." Domestic disputes. As if we'd just argued over rent. I asked if he ever cared about me at all. He said, "You misread friendship, that's all." I wanted to slap him. Instead, I just stared until he turned away. That night, Clara came over to check on me. She brought groceries and that cautious pity in her eyes that I hated. I tried to act strong, joked that maybe I'd get half the house. She didn't laugh. "You might not," she said softly. "He moved the title into a trust last month. You didn't notice?" My mouth went dry. He'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. Every quiet day, every cold look, it hadn't been indecision. It was strategy. 2 days later, my lawyer called. "They've finalized their offer," he said. Evan would take full ownership of the house and savings accounts, but he wouldn't pursue spousal support or damages. He'd pay child support only until paternity was legally terminated, which could take another few months. "It's a fair deal," my lawyer said carefully, as if fairness had anything to do with this. When the next hearing came, Evan was calmer than ever. He sat across from me, hands folded, eyes focused on the judge. I tried one last time to speak directly to him. "Evan, please, we can work this out. Noah needs you." He didn't even flinch. His lawyer answered for him. "My client has fulfilled all obligations as required by law." The judge signed the temporary orders. My name stayed on the custody papers, his was removed. That was it. Done in under an hour. Years of marriage reduced to signatures. Outside, Linda was waiting for him on the courthouse steps. She hugged him like she'd been holding her breath all month. I wanted to shout at her, to remind her how many dinners I'd hosted, how many holidays I'd planned, how many times I'd called her Mom. But when she looked at me, I saw no hatred, just disappointment. She turned back to Evan, saying something I couldn't hear, and they walked off together. My lawyer told me to keep calm, to focus on rebuilding, to stay civil for future cooperation. I nodded because I didn't have the energy to argue. But when I got home, the emptiness hit. Half the closet was bare, his books, his photos, gone. The air smelled different. I found his old wedding ring box on the counter, empty, except for a folded note that said, "I wish things had been different." That night, I poured a glass of wine, stared at the wall, and realized Evan hadn't taken revenge in the way I expected. There were no fights, no shouting matches, no public scandals, just cold precision. He'd taken everything, peacefully, legally, completely, and somehow that made it worse. I called him again before bed, one last time. The call went straight to voicemail. I said, "You can't just erase us like this. You'll regret it." My voice cracked on the last word. A few minutes later, a text came through. "Stop contacting me. Further communication must go through counsel." That was the moment it truly sank in. He wasn't coming back, and the only thing left of our marriage was paperwork. The house is quiet now, too big for just me and Noah. His toys are scattered across the floor, reminders of a life that doesn't fit anymore. Evan's name is gone from every document, every frame, every corner. I keep expecting his key to turn in the door, but it never does. Today, the lawyer's letter arrived. Final decree, no visitation, property transferred. I stood at the window and watched him load boxes into his car one last time. He didn't look back. I whispered that he'd regret it, but even as I said it, I knew he never would. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.